Hello Gaffr players, hope you're all doing well and looking forward to the start of the season. I'm FF Joel from Gaffr Tapes and yeah, really excited to get going. Only 3 days till game week 1 at time of recording, and this is just something a little bit different that I wanted to do today on choosing your Gaffr boosts. Just a quick video to help you hopefully decide which boosts you want to play in this first period, this first set in game weeks 1 to 15. This is something that is very new to us as fantasy players. Obviously, we're used to having chips in FPL, but we know that we're going to have to play our triple captain on our bench boosts. It's just a case of deciding when we play them. But what's so great about Gaffr and so unique about it is now we actually have to pick and choose which boosts we want to play, which ones we think are better and give us the best chance of scoring more points than others. And it's a very different dynamic, and I think it's a very interesting dynamic. And I'm hoping that whether you have already decided what boost you're going to play, or at least have a very firm idea in your mind, or if you have no idea what you're going to do with your boosts, in either one of those cases, I think this video will be useful and it will throw up something interesting. I know that my mind has changed since researching this and kind of doing some calculations and working out the potential of each boost. It's made me rethink a little bit. So I think what you're going to see is going to be interesting. So I'm going to dive in. So what I'm planning on doing is to assess how good each boost is, I'm going to be looking at each boost's floor, its average and its ceiling. So it's probably quite self-explanatory what these words mean, but just in case you're not sure, the floor of a boost would be the points that you gain from that boost in the worst possible scenario. If you have a really bad game week, if the boost completely failed, how many points would you expect to gain from it? Average is points gained in a standard week, so it's roughly what we are kind of expecting from our boost when we play it, roughly. And the ceiling is obviously if you have an amazing game week. If you absolutely smash it, how many points could you potentially get in the best possible case? So that's the terminology. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into each of the 6 boosts, and I'm going to give you my kind of estimation of their floor, average and ceiling. But first of all, let's just think about what makes up a good boost. And when you compare boosts, what sort of things you need to consider. So firstly, the simplest measure of boost potential is the average points gained. So what I mean by that is, roughly what you'd expect to get from the boost, more often than not. The higher that number is, the better that boost is, because it's something that tends to get you more points. I've then put that the lower the floor, the higher the risk. And I think that's quite obvious. If there's a chance that you end up getting even 0 points from your boost, then it's a higher risk boost to play than others. And a higher ceiling is a higher potential, which is very obvious. The higher the upside, the higher the ceiling, the better the boost is. The lower the floor doesn't necessarily make it a worse boost, but it does mean it's a more risky boost and it has more chance of going wrong. Now, there are some boosts that I think are similar in terms of their average scoring, and in fact their floors and their averages and their ceilings. So hold this thought for later, towards the end of the video, because we're going to talk about this specifically with a couple of the boosts later. The higher likelihood of hitting that floor is also a higher risk. So some boosts, it may have a really low floor of maybe 0 points, but it's highly unlikely that happens. You'd have to be dreadfully unlucky or just play it so badly to hit the floor. But there'll be other boosts that are a bit more likely of hitting the floor. If you think about the boosts that there are in the game at the moment, maybe you can have an idea in your head of maybe what one of those boosts might be in particular that has a higher likelihood of it failing and therefore making it a higher risk boost. So yeah, those are just a few general points to consider when you're deciding what boost to play. These are all factors you need to think about, I think. So now I'm going to dive into all the boosts and tell you what I think their floor, average and ceiling is and why. So first of all, overhaul. So that's your wildcard, unlimited transfers, and this is obviously a very different boost to all the others because its impact is very hard to measure. It can't be measured just in the game week that you play it because you're completely changing your team. The overhaul has ramifications for 5, 10 game weeks into the future, maybe even for the whole season in terms of how many points you gain from it. So I've said that the points you gain from the boost is unquantifiable. The floor is less than 0 points, so you could have negative impact playing your overhaul if you somehow manage to get a new team that ended up scoring worse than your old team. That feels unlikely, particularly because if your team's in good shape, you probably wouldn't play the overhaul. But that is the flaw. It's a very unlikely flaw, but it's possible. And yeah, the average is unquantifiable and the ceiling is unquantifiable, but undoubtedly high, especially if your team's a mess. If your team is in a mess and you play your overhaul, that could easily make up 50 plus points in the long run, just by completely changing your team and getting in assets that are scoring well, without having to take loads of hits to fix your team. So for all the other boosts, I'm going to be putting numbers to these three things, but it's really hard to say for overhaul what the impact is, which does lead us to some tough decisions. And also you've got to consider with the overhaul, if you're playing that to plan for another boost, for example, overhauling 1 week to away days the next week, what you've got to then think about is how does that improve your away days? Probably it will do because you're getting in the best assets for that boost. And it's almost a team reset as well. But then you are losing out on points from one of the other boosts, which is the main thing to consider with overhaul. You're losing out on the points from a point scoring boost. And yeah, I just wanted to note there that last year's winner didn't use any overhauls whatsoever. And when I come to the end, one of the things I will say is that I think the best thing to do is try not to use an overhaul. But if you have to, sometimes it's the best thing if your team needs fixing. The amount of times in FPL when my team's been in absolute state by game week 4 or 5, and I've had to press the early wild card. Don't be stubborn in not playing overhaul if you think that you're trying to avoid it. Park the bus. By the way, I'm just going in the order that they're in on the site. So the next one is Park the bus, which is the ×2 multiplier for defenders, so defenders score double, and no captain multipliers. Now, what's really important when you are assessing these point scoring boosts is actually what points are you gaining from playing it compared to if you didn't play it at all and you just treat it as a normal game week. And I think there's a few misconceptions, particularly around multi-captain as well, and things that people just haven't thought through around what value does this boost have. So the points you gain from playing Park the Bus is the total base score of your playing defenders, so the full doubling, minus your captain score and minus half of your vice captain score. Obviously, if you play Park the Bus, you might not think about who your captain is, just stick it on anyone. But if you think about who would you be captaining and vice captaining in a normal week, obviously you're not going to get the captain score doubled, and you're not going to get the 1.5 multiplier for your vice captain. So you do have to subtract those scores when you think about how much have you gained. And this is significant, and I found it quite easy to forget this when thinking about playing Park the Bus. So the floor I've put as around 0 to 5 points, and that is if your captain and your vice captain scores that you add up, the captain and half your vice captain score, manage to somehow match or close to match the total score of your defenders, which I think if you play it in the right week is very unlikely. But if your captain and vice captain have good fixtures, then it is possible that this may happen. And that's the last thing you want, for your defenders to concede goals and get 2 or 3 pointers each, and then your captain to go on and get 15 points scoring a brace or something. So yeah, that's why the Park Bus actually has quite a low floor, even though I think our perception is at Park the Bus that its floor is a fair bit higher than that. Yeah, so that's the floor. The average I've put is 15 to 25 points roughly. And a good example of this, this would be maybe a standard return from your partner versus your something like 10, 6, 6, 4, 2 for your defenders. That's before doubling, and then your captain, vice captain, half vice captain scores add up to 10. So maybe there's like one return in there, something like that. It could easily be a bit more, 12 to 15, especially with bonus points. But that's an example of something that might be a standard park bus, which would gain you about 15 to 25 points, something in that range. Then I've put a ceiling of 35 to 40 points, and an example there of a really good part of the bus: 13, 9, 8, 6, 4. So 13 might be that's an assist, clean sheet, and 4 bonus. 9 and 8 might either be half clean sheet and 4 bonus, an assist, assistance and bonus, a goal, or clean sheet and a couple of bonus. Good returns from your defence, and also your captains and vice captain both blank, which would mean only 3 points that would be subtracted off. So that would put you in your ceiling of kind of 35 to 40 points, which is good. That's really quite big and significant. So that's part of the bus. At the end, I'm going to come back and review and summarise everything. So all of this will be back on in one screen later on. Goalfest, 5 points for every goal scored, including the substitutes. But those 5 points don't get doubled for your captain, for example. So the points you gain, this is nice and simple, just 5 points per goal across your whole squad. Really easy. And the floor is 0 points if your team scores no goals whatsoever, which is not impossible by any stretch on a bad week. Average of 15 to 20 points, that's 3 or 4 goals. It's kind of standard in a single game week. By the way, I forgot to say earlier that I'm assuming in this video that there are no doubles in game week 1 to 15. This is kind of based on a single game week. COVID is still around and causing a lot of issues at the moment, so things may change, but that's the assumption that I'm making here. Ceiling, 30 to 35 points, so 6 or 7 goals is probably the max you can expect. But that's a pretty good return from your Goalfest. Away days. Double points for your away players, but no captain multipliers. So again, the points you gained is the total base score of all your away players. So before doubling, subtracting your captain score and half your vice captain score for who you would have captained or vice captained in a normal week. And again, this one isn't too complicated. The floor, 25 to 30 points is if you have a really bad week, maybe you get 35 to 40 points, and then your captain does reasonably well anyway, so you have to subtract 10 points for your captain, something like that, or just a really, really terrible week. Average of 55 to 65 points. That's an average overall week. So I averaged 81 points per game week last season, but that's including the boosts and all the double game weeks. So the average single game week score probably roughly around the 70-ish mark, and then subtracting off your captain and vice captain scores. That's how I arrived at around 55 to 65 points. The ceiling is if you have a fantastic overall week, it's quite common for people to hit 90, 100 in their even in single game weeks, and so you could have a great overall week and gain 80 to 90 points from the away days boost, which is quite frankly mad. So next one, multi-captain. So for this one, you basically have 3 captains. So your captain, your vice, and your emergency captain all get double points. Now this is the important one. And last season, people were thinking, "Oh, that's really good. You get 3 captains." But when you think about what points you're actually gaining from this boost, it's half of your vice captain score, because it's going from a 1.5 multiplier to a 2 multiplier, and your emergency captain score, because you're getting what your emergency captain scored again, because it's being doubled. So you gain nothing for your original captain, for your best asset. If you're kind of going to grade your, even though when you play the boost, it doesn't matter who you put as vice or emergency or whatever. If you think about in a normal week, how would you have ranked them as captain, vice, emergency? You need to think about what you're gaining. So you're only gaining half your vice and your emergency captain score. So that's your third choice player that you're gaining their full score. And this is one of the reasons why I thought last season Captain Fantastic was better, which is triple captain plus double for your vice, which was because basically you take the emergency captain score and change that to captain. You're gaining your captain score and half your vice captain score. And I'd rather gain the points from the player I expect to do well, rather than the player that I'd have captained originally, rather than my third choice. But that's not relevant to this set of boosts. So the floor for multi-captain is put less than or equal to 3 points. So 3 points is if your vice captain and your emergency captain both blank. It could be less if they get yellow cards or red cards or own goals and the like. But you can reasonably say around the 3 point mark, just for two pointers really. Average of 10 to 15 points. You might get a couple of returns between them. For example, your vice captain gets 10 points. That could be a return and a few bonus. And that's half to 5, and then your emergency captain gets 7 points, which would give you a total of 12. That's the sort of thing you could maybe expect. And a ceiling of 20 to 25 points, which is when both of your vice captain and your emergency captain haul. So maybe your vice captain gets 16 points, so you gain 8, and your emergency captain gains a 15-pointer for a brace or a goal and assist and bonus and things like that for 23 points. So that's an example there. Jeepers keepers. This is the last one, isn't it? Both keeper scores count. The bonus of you get bonus points for both keepers of 2 points for every half clean sheet, 3 points per save, 10 points per penalty save. And these points that get added on are not affected by captain multipliers. So what points do you gain from this boost? Now this is the one I kind of forgot about when I was thinking about Jeepers Keepers, and it makes the boost better than I first thought. You gain the substitute keeper's base score because both keepers' scores count. So whatever the sub keeper would have scored in a normal game week, you gain without the bonuses. You gain those points plus also the bonuses for both keepers for your half clean sheets, saves, and penalty saves. So I've put down a floor of around about 6 points. Let's say there's an average of maybe a save and a half clean sheet each, or a save or a half clean sheet each, or something like that. So they get 2 or 3 bonuses each, plus the 2 points for starting, or they might concede 2 goals as well and have 1 taken off. Roughly 5-6 points, something like that. An average of 20 points. So yeah, in a kind of reasonable week, kind of average week, you might expect a couple of half clean sheets, and maybe between them they might make 4 saves, 2 each, something like that. It seems in the Championship that some of the keepers for the lower teams average between 2 and 3 saves per game for the worst teams. So I've been, I guess, quite conservative in my estimate of 4 saves total from the 2 keepers. And then so those 2 half clean sheets and 4 saves plus, so that would amount to what, 12 plus 4, so 16, plus maybe let's say your sub keeper gets a half clean sheet, so 4 points is their base score, so that gets you up to 20. Got a ceiling of around 55 points. Let's say there's a penalty save, and that penalty save is the keeper on your bench, so you gain even more points from their base score as well. 2 clean sheets and maybe 8 saves total, so roughly 4 saves each, can get you up close to 50 odd points, 55 points. It's highly unlikely because pen saves are so rare, but it just shows that this boost has some great potential. So that's all the 6 boosts and their floor, average, and ceiling. So to summarise, here's a little table, and this should be very helpful in helping us to determine which boost to play. So before I did this video, away days was an obvious lock, but part of the bus was also a lock in my mind. It's a bit less clear cut than that now when you look at this. Obviously, all these numbers that I've done are predictions, and you may think that some of the calculations I've done are not quite right. You might have a different idea yourself of what each boost is worth. But from my own kind of predictions and estimations, Jeepers Keepers, Part the Bus, and Goalfest are very, very similar boosts in terms of their floor, average, and ceiling. So, and even for Jeepers Keepers, if you assume there's no penalty save in there, you can knock that down to kind of 35 to 40 as well. You kind of knock it down to Part the Bus ceiling, really. Which means actually, because I know a lot of us think that Part the Bus is probably the second best boost, quite clearly, we need to perhaps reconsider that and think about whether Goalfest and Jeepers Keepers can match that. And then Overhaul, I've put NA, and then Multi-Captain is the one that I think you shouldn't play at all, because it's got a similar floor, it's got a lower average than the rest, and even then it's quite likely that you even just gain 5, 6, 7, 8 points out of it, really. If one of them blanks, for example, your Vice and Emergency, and the ceiling is obviously lower than all the rest as well. So Multi-Captain's a no. Overhaul I've put in yellow because there are circumstances where you may need to play it or want to play it. Away days is a lock. So we've now got to think about Jeepers Keepers, Part the Bus, and Goalfest. And kind of, I want to kind of dig a bit deeper now into those three. Before I do that, actually, this is my suggested plan, because the last thing I'm going to do is a bit more, it's bringing out the maths geek side in me, which will interest some of you. But if you just want my simple suggested plan, it's away days, which I'm sure all of you know already. I would suggest you should try not to require an overhaul, because I mean, I only used one last season and it didn't help me at all, and the winner didn't use any at all. But you know, if it's needed, then or if you're nowhere near able to create a good away days team, for example, you could overhaul into that to save you having to take 5 hits or something to get a good away days team out. And then depending on whether you've used your overhaul and depending on your team, pick 1 or 2 of Jeepers Keepers, Part the Bus, and Goalfest. Which ones out of those 3? Let's have a look. So I have drawn a little graph here, and this is just, they all have the same sort of average and a similar ceiling, especially if we assume Jeepers Keepers has no penalty saves. So one of the things, if you think back to right at the start when I was talking about a boost is higher risk if there is a higher likelihood that you hit the floor. Now, my opinion is that out of these 3 boosts, the likelihood of hitting the floor is greater for Goalfest than any of the others. I went back through my scores last season, and bear in mind that there were multiple double game weeks here, but 9 times, in 9 different game weeks out of the 46, in my team I had either 0 goals or 1 goal. And then a whole host of other times, I didn't count, but probably at least 4 or 5, I had 2 goals. But 9 times having 0 or 1 goals, that's roughly 1 in 5 game weeks. And it's certainly more than 1 in 5 single game weeks. Now I think that's quite risky. And if you play Goalfest and it's not a great week, you really do have quite a high chance of only hitting 5 or 10 points, which to me is not enough, especially when you could quite easily hit that with multi-captain. And on the graph, I've demonstrated Goalfest in the purple and drawn these lines. So the average is about the same, but what I'm kind of saying here is it's a bit more skewed, that the graph is more skewed. If you see the red graph of Part the Bus, which I'll talk about in a second, is symmetrical. It's a symmetrical curve. At least that's my prediction. That's my kind of estimation of kind of what the distribution of scores gained, points gained for Part the Bus would look like. This is all stuff that I've done in my head. I've not trailed through all the teams and collected all the data and then made these graphs. This is just my perception of how the scores would be kind of distributed probabilistically. if you would excuse my the maths nerd in me, but I think it might be helpful. So yeah, the Goalfest is a bit more skewed towards the lower end, and I think you're more likely to hit 1 or 2 goals, so 5 or 10 points, than you are of hitting 6 or 7 goals. Hitting 30 to 35 points, so you're more likely to hit the floor than hit the ceiling. So to me, that makes Goalfest riskier than the other two. I see part of this as quite an even distribution across your, I think just as likely to hit the floor as you are to kind of get close to the ceiling. By my perception of things, you may or may not agree with me on that. And Jeepers Keepers, I think, is somewhere in the middle. I think it's ever so slightly skewed to the lower end. I think you're slightly more likely to hit, maybe one, like 3 saves between the keepers and 1 half clean sheet, which is not a terrible return, but a fairly small one. It would be a bit less than the average. It might be 10 points or so, something like that. I don't know, 10 to 15 points. So I'd say Jeepers Keepers is somewhere in the middle. So on that basis, so that's something to consider, but you also need to consider a couple of other factors as well. When boosts are similar, they're like for like, and one of the other factors you need to consider is how much prep do you need to do for each one. So for example, you may decide, and this is all team dependent. Some teams, it may be, for example, you've got a really great Goalfest team and you don't want to do a keeper transfer. And so Goalfest makes the most sense. You've already got a good Goalfest team for a particular week, so you can just whack the boost on. But for others, you might think, if I'm going to play Goalfest, what I need to do is I might need to take a couple of hits, maybe a -8 or something, to get to a team that I like for Goalfest. Whereas for Jeepers Keepers, it might just be a case of doing 1 transfer for free. So that's the thing you need to bear in mind. How much prep do you need to do for it? Will it ruin your team? Do you need to take hits to get to a point at which you're happy to play the boost? In which case, that may sway you to one or the other. And for me, I think you're more likely to be swayed away from Goalfest and towards something like Jeepers Keepers in that sense. So what my conclusion is from this is I think I will still play Part of the Bus. It was really firm in my mind before this video, but I will still play it because I think it's quite unlikely that I see it as a safer boost than the others. I think I'm quite unlikely to hit the floor, and I think I feel more likely to hit the kind of higher end of things. It's a less skewed distribution in my mind when I think about it. So it's a bit more reliable. And I will probably play Jeepers Keepers now rather than Goalfest because I think it will require less prep. And I think as well, it's a bit less risky in terms of the likelihood of hitting the lower end. And I also feel like it's a bit more likely, even though the picture doesn't actually reflect that, the sketch, a bit more likely to hit a higher number. A really good return. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments below on YouTube or on Twitter. All the best for Game Week 1 and beyond. And hopefully this has been helpful when you think about what boosts you're going to play. So there's the suggested plan again of what I think you should do. All right. All the best, everyone, and have a good Game Week 1.